I'd like to begin. Welcome to the 23rd Family Impact Seminar. Michigan State University and Department of Human Development and Family Studies offers these seminars as educational information around family issues. Topics are selected by state policymakers, so we don't get to talk about our favorite topics. But the idea is to educate policymakers with the latest information that will help in their deliberation and decision making. We obviously are firmly committed around family matters. We are not the only one in the country that does this. There are 22 other states that do it, including Washington, D.C. So these seminars are usually situated in state capitals, and we provide presentations and policy briefs for the audience. So thank you very much for coming out in a cold morning. And I think you'll find the information quite stimulating. We had a session in Midtown Detroit yesterday that I think was a home run. It was a wonderful audience that was open to learn. The information is fresh, and I think people left with a sense that this was a worthwhile time to invest and listening to these three women who have so much knowledge. We have covered a variety of topics. In the last few seminars, they have been focused on health, but we have also covered issues around juvenile justice, corrections, insurance, jobs and the economy. So please keep us in mind. We will be sending save the date flyers to all participants who have come to the seminars in the past. Today, our topic is infant mortality. And the governor has it on his dashboard. And you see the green and the reds. Infant mortality is the third one down. Prior in 2011, 7.7, and we got down to 7.4, right? Good, but not enough. Infant mortality has been a topic of concern, and for Michigan, I would say at least 2 decades. We have seen very little change in a positive fashion. The march of dimes, and the United States is not doing as well either. In a country with wealth, we are not top. My students say, well, the United States would be number 1. Nay. We're like 22 or something. And so we get a grade of a C. Now when we look at Michigan, we also get a grade of C. The goal is 9.6. I had a geographer develop a GIS map on the infant death rate ratio. It's a little bit complicated. I don't want to get into the details of it, but the ones that are darker is where we have a race disparity. The greatest number, and somebody would say to me, well, why Grand Rapids? This kind of visual, I think, stimulates questions, which is very good. So while we may say some of the infant rate mortality has decreased, when we look at the difference between races, it has been alarming. Okay. So I would like for you to pay attention to this blue sheet. We have funding from Kellogg Foundation. So if you could fill this out, I would really appreciate it. So we have a fairly strong report to give them. And I also would like to acknowledge the House and the Senate Health Policy Committees for their support and of our topic today. They co-sponsor the seminars. And we had another speaker that is not here today, Brenda Jegedy, who is project manager for Prime. And she did an excellent presentation. And I will send you the PowerPoints of that. I think you will find that quite useful and interesting. So, did you get your mic?
That's fine, go ahead. That's all right.
No mic?
They're on their way.
On their way. All right.
That's okay.
I guess, you
Yep,
know,
that's fine.
response time is not great. I would like to introduce our first speaker. And let me tell you, we had Michael Liu, superstar in the area of infant mortality from HRSA. And first, he never said no, he would come. And then he said, I'll send you a video. So I said, okay, I'm groveling now, you know. I've seen his work, it's really excellent. So I said, okay, I'll take a video. And he said, it's worked for other places. And then, so I called and they said, I'm so sorry, he had an emergency trip to Taiwan. So then I'm scrambling and Dr. Kennedy came into my whole consideration, and she said, I think I can do it. But I didn't actually see her until yesterday for the first time. So I thank her very much. She is the health officer for Ingham County. She still is affiliated with Michigan State, but she was in the College of Nursing before. And I think she will help you ease into this cold morning with some enlightening information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naga. How is everyone? Fine. Uh-oh, I hit some wrong button.
There you go.
Okay. I just really wanted to make sure you were awake. A little levity. I'm pleased to share with you this morning. Always honored to be the understudy of the great Michael Liu. He is one of the progressive thinkers, and I've used his work, cited his work, quoted his work, so I'm excited to share really some contextualizing information for you. For some, it may be new, the way the spin on it. For others, it may just be a reminder, but that will then set the stage for the more specific examples that you'll hear from the other speakers. So as we think about pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, and let me just share with you all, as I shared with the group yesterday, this is a topic that I'm professionally and personally passionate about. It is my dissertation research and pregnancy experiences of African American women as compared to white women. And it was interesting because my mentor at the time said, well, why are you going to just focus on black women? You're probably going to have to spend your career justifying that, but if you're really committed to it, I'll support you. Well, little did we know that in the early 90s, we were just introducing this discourse of health disparities and inequities. I also am passionate because I had the displeasure of contributing to these statistics in 1989 when my son was born at 28 weeks gestation and then died at 6 months due to complications from his prematurity. And so if I, a overly educated woman with great access, can experience this challenge, then how much more am I held to fight for those more vulnerable than I? So, we think about this context of health and healthy pregnancies and what that means, and typically we sort of think about, well, healthy eating. We think about, don't forget your exercise, get plenty of sleep, and your regular doctor's visit. This is kind of our 4x4 in Michigan. And if everything were ideal in the world, the 4x4 and simply focused would work. But we're asking people to eat healthy, exercise, and get rest who live in very different neighborhoods. Some of them very broken and run down, others beautiful and established. Some of them walking by businesses that are boarded up, and others walking by businesses that are flourishing. What your neighbors do makes a difference in your ability to apply those 4 basic recommendations. So, are your neighbors executing violence, or are they executing healthy behaviors like in this picture? And lastly, the built, well not lastly, but almost lastly, the built environment. I was sharing that as health officer, I was preparing to condemn a, what some might call a mobile home community. I would call a trailer park, because it was really just that beat down. And so I'm faced with the public health challenge of this environment is not safe, but how immediate is the threat, and do I really want to displace 25 vulnerable families right at the beginning of the holidays? And so what I want you to see is there's no pure interpretation of how we do health. Built environment, lead paint, unhealthy surfaces, unhealthy indoor air quality, and what's happening in your backyard. All of these things make a difference. So when you have a pregnant mom before you, wonderful prognosis, go home, do X, Y, Z, and then you get completely different outcomes, it is because of the context of their lives. Whether their school looks like this, or their school looks like this, which is the next door neighbor of a local jail. And so our challenge becomes, let me grab my water, please. Our challenge becomes, how do we contextualize health, both in where people live and also in what people do, what type of work are they employed in, and then we can think about what differences are happening in people's lives around eating healthy, exercising, those typical things. So this cover I want to share with you, one, to just acknowledge that we're very proud at Ingham County to have a chapter in this book, which is on tackling health inequities, but more so for us to just chat for a minute about the picture. So if you look at the art on this cover, tell me what jumps out at you.
The number of steps.
The number of steps on
A ladder.
the ladder, okay?
And how far apart they are.
So they're fewer, and not only are they fewer, but they're really far displaced. What else do you notice?
I see a hand reaching up. I don't know if that signifies anything.
Well, this is like a Van Gogh interpretive exercise, so no wrong answers. If hand reaching up, what does that signify for you?
Maybe some help up there.
Maybe some help up there. Good point. What else? Couple more things that you notice.
I saw it go green.
Yes, and green is quite symbolic. Other than the Rose Bowl, green also signifies what kinds of things in our society? Money. Health. We've got this whole green movement, success. Yeah. So I will say, I'm always thrilled to show this. Now, I've been showing this picture probably for, 6 or 7 years. And the public narrative is shifting. Because initially when I showed this picture, people would say, well, there's a green person, there's a brown person, one person's reaching up, one person's holding on, one person's looking down. And they were all focused on the disparities, which are the differences between these people. Rarely did people notice the ladders, which are the inequities. Because what we've tended to do is to say, well, I got a ladder, you got a ladder, what's the problem? Instead of looking at, no, yeah. And then we would condemn and blame this person and say, well, they've got a ladder, but they're not even trying to use it. So we are advancing as a society in this dialogue, is the point that I want to tell you. I love one of my students who said, you know, this person's reaching up for help. How easy would it be for them, instead of just looking down going, tisk, tisk, for you, to just lower that hand and say, hey, why don't you just hop over to my ladder and we'll get to where we're going together. So this is kind of the narrative, the discourse that we're trying to push and shift now in public health. So just to give you a little bit of vocabulary, health disparities, which was the classic term that you still will see, but really it was just talking about the disproportionate difference in health between two populations. It's measurable, it's observable, you can document it, but it's just simply an observation. On the other hand, Margaret Whitehead has a definition of health inequity, which is the bigger concern for us. And that definition is differences in population health status and mortality rates that are systemic, they are patterned, they are unfair and unjust. And so we've made a determination to introduce values into the discussion. Yes, we're deciding there is a right, there is a wrong, there is a just, there is an unjust. And the challenge that she makes is they're actionable. There's something we can do about it. So instead of throwing up our hands and saying, poverty, well, I can't do anything about poverty. Yes, we can do something about poverty. And so this is the mantra that we move forward on. I love this quote from Martin Luther King. And he says, I have the audacity, and I just love that word, the audacity to believe that people everywhere, yeah, even in the United States, can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equity, and freedom for their spirits. So we just have to get sort of fed up. We got to get sick and tired of our neighbors and friends of being sick and tired. Because those of us in this room are the privileged core. And if we don't use our privilege, whether it's gender privilege, racial privilege, religious privilege, economic privilege, there was a season where we would just sort of condemn people. Oh yeah, white privilege is bad. Well, privilege is really something, it's unearned. So if I didn't do anything to earn it, I can't do anything to get rid of it, but I can do something with it to empower the community. So I have lots of positional privilege. I can make decisions in my department that no one else can make. So am I using that privilege to empower and assist, or am I using that privilege to advance my own agenda? So this is where those of us, I hope, will just have the audacity to say we've got to do things a little bit different in this society. We know that there are all types of clinical findings and results. Clinical determinants are not in of themselves the solution for this problem. When I was working on my dissertation, and I was saying yesterday that, I was hanging out in the stacks, and of course students today have no appreciation for the stacks. Just pulling out a bunch of journals and sitting there going through them, and I came across, right, I know, Touch Red Really's like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is the stacks? I came across an American Journal of Public Health article, and it was like from 1912 or 1911, something like that. It was called The Negro Health Problem. And I could have taken that article, whited out Negro, put African American, changed the date, and passed it out today. Because we know, and we continue to see, that in the 1800s, black babies were twice as likely to die as white babies. In the 1900s, black babies twice as likely to die as white babies. And in some jurisdictions, including my own, anywhere from 3 to 4 times as likely to die. And the same can be said for Native American babies. And so, our audacity needs to tell us, we're doing something wrong. We're not getting the whole picture, because we are bright and we are well-meaning. But what we need to be is less sort of well-intended and well-meaning and more well-doing. Doing the right things to make a difference. And so social determinants is sort of the missing link So I'm going to show you, I've tried to simplify a relatively complex diagram. But social determinants of health are those non-clinical factors. They're the reason, again, why you take two folk with the same diagnosis, the same prognosis, you do the same plan of care, you ship them out, and the provider says, okay, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And you come back and you say to this pregnant mom, what do you mean you're still eating French fries? I told you to eat more fruits and vegetables. Oh, non-compliant, you know. So social determinants are really all types of things. Housing. One of the things that we tried to focus in this diagram is that it's not just housing, but it's safe, affordable housing. As you saw in the pictures, lots of people have housing, but not many of them. Why don't we click that off into the video? And then it won't. You guys can hear me okay, right?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. I really wanted that because I have a 3-minute clip I wanted to show you. And so I was worried that the mic for the computer the speaker wouldn't be loud enough. So we'll get back to that. So not just do you have a salary, but is it a living wage? Not just do you have education, is it quality? And so we've added adjectives because there is a standard. Not are you jumping, flitting from job to job, but do you have job security with benefits, with sick leave? So many of my clients that we serve in my health department, if they're not at work, they're not getting paid. So to tell them, bring your kid back in 2 weeks is a huge sacrifice that we don't appreciate often. So these social determinants of health, we know, contribute to psychosocial stress. Stress contributes to unhealthy behaviors, and unhealthy behaviors results in these disparities that we observe and measure. The issue is we've only been having the conversation down here, calling these root causes. These are not root causes. The causes of these causes are way advanced of that, and they're really about power and wealth imbalances. They're about inequitable distribution of resources. And whether people want to look at that and say, oh, that's socialist theory, and that's kind of Marxist, and that is not at all. It's math. I'm just saying, look with me at the math, and some people have all the health resources, all the health outcomes, and other people don't. And if we as a society have decided that's okay, then that's a different dialogue. But I don't think we've decided that. So recognizing that there are these power and wealth imbalances, and much of them are embedded in the social structure. And the social structure in our society, just because of who we are as a nation, are really invested in 3 big blocks. And those big blocks are institutional racism, class oppression, and gender discrimination. We still experience those things. I, myself, came into leadership roles where there were 2 of us with the same title, and I learned that my counterpart, who happened to be a white man, was getting paid more than me. And so when I inquired, how dare I, there goes that audacity again, got lots of explanations, and they've been working here longer, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not years of service. If we control for that, if we look at the salary scale, my position is placed lower. Well, HR has these formulas. So I don't think anybody's sitting back inadvertently saying, let's disadvantage women. Let's disadvantage people of color. Let's disadvantage lower income. It is the unanticipated and oftentimes subconscious consequences of the decisions we make. And then folk like me, sociologists, come in and say, here's the trend. Regardless of what you meant to do, here's the outcome, and what are we going to do about that? So we need to stop being so intimidated by the findings and just address the findings. So one of the things that we have been doing as part of a national movement in public health is trying to change the mindset and really begin to look at our work again through a health equity lens, because that's what we used to do in public health. So instead of saying, why do people smoke, only saying, why do people smoke, which is a very important question, we also should be asking, okay, well, what are the social conditions? What are the economic policies that are predisposing people to the stress that then encourages smoking. So it's both and. This is about personal responsibility, but it is also about social responsibility. We hold these truths to be self-evident. What are the truths that we hold as a nation? So instead of just asking who lacks healthy food and why, we should also be asking what are the policy changes that would redistribute healthy food across the community more equitably. Those are Chamber of Commerce decisions. Those are all of us in here, not just providers and public health folk, but it is our legislators and our policymakers. It is our business colleagues. So we can go on and on with questions similar to this. Green spaces. What are the policy and practices that make the healthy choice the default? Right now, the healthy choice is not the default. So I challenge us to really imagine health. What does that mean? What is my role? What is your role? What are our roles together? And I want to give you just this 3-minute clip, which was done by the Centers for Disease Control, a campaign about the health of our nation. As Dr. Anaga was commenting, given all our financial resources and all of our other accomplishments, we should be, dare I say, in the top 10, if not the healthiest nation in the world, and we are not. And that's the context of this real quick video, and then I will turn it over to my colleagues. See if that works. All right, I'll move it once it gets going. You will have to read. This is something you have to read while it's going. So let's see. Michigan. There are 5 states that are partnering with community organizing to help bring this to pass. Thank you for your attention.
Legislators that have come into the audience, and 2 of them are chairs of the Health Policy Committee. Senator Marlowe from the Health Policy for the Senate, and Representative Gail Haynes, who is the chair for the House in Health Policy. And they have been troopers. We have worked together now. I mean, it's not been always, easy, but we have had scheduling issues because they're so busy. But they have been great supporters of the Family Impact Seminar, so we really appreciate that. And Senator Caswell, who is always interested in data and the truth. He has come to our seminars quite often, so thank you very much. Representative Hayes will introduce our next speaker.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I would like to mention, however, that I am the junior trooper, and Senator Marlowe would be the senior. I could mention age, but we'll go by experience. How's that?
You need beer first.
Alrighty, well, I am very pleased to be introducing Dr. Althea Carr, former director of the Maternal and Child Health Department of the Michigan Department of Community Health. Ms. Carr was the Maternal and Child Health Director for the state of Michigan at the Michigan Department of Community Health, and she has held that role for the past 6 years. She has been responsible for administering the more than 50 state programs and policies that support the health of women, children, and families in the state through our public health infrastructure. She has been with state government for more than 25 years in various public health administrative capacities. She is currently one of the project investigators for a Kellogg Foundation funded project to identify a model curriculum and toolkit for state public health professionals' use to improve health equity in the maternal and child health arena. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Prior to taking the MCH director position, she headed the Michigan WIC program for 9 years as the director. She has worked in local county health departments, hospitals, and school food service. Althea was a Food and Society Policy Fellow, where she explored issues about the lack of available fresh produce in the Metro Detroit area and worked to publicize this inequity. And I think that most of us in this room have followed that issue, and that is turning around now, thanks to your work. She is a registered dietitian with a MBA. She is married and the mother of 2 adult daughters. Ms. Carr retired from state government on September 1st, 2013, but we are very glad that she is still active and here to speak to us today. So please help me welcome Althea Carr.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you this morning. I'm really pleased to be here. I mentioned yesterday that this was my first presentation since retiring, so this is the second one I'm doing now. How many recognize this slide? Who's seen it before? Does it look familiar at all? As the Bureau Director of the Family and Maternal Child Health Bureau, we work with the epidemiologists within MDCH to look at the data related to infant mortality over time. And as you can see from, As you can see from the slide here, we looked at data over several decades. This purple slide is the infant mortality rate for Michigan, and it has gone down over time. The blue line represents the white infant mortality rate, while the red line is black infant mortality rate, all of which continue to decrease over time. But what is interesting is if you look at this squiggly green line, it seems to be going up. And that's the infant mortality ratio that looks at the gap between black and white infant mortality. So even though fewer babies are dying, that gap that we're seeing continues to increase. And that was just unacceptable to us in the Bureau. You know, we continue to ask the questions, why was that happening? You've heard Dr. Kennedy talk about examining those kinds of issues a little deeper. So it led us to really look at what we needed to do to get an answer to the question. I'm presenting slides that Brenda Jagaday shared with the group yesterday that talks about the project that we received from the Kellogg Foundation called PRIME, Practices to Reduce Infant Mortality Through Equity. And we use acronyms quite liberally within the department. And I just want to share with you some of the work that we've done and things we've learned through this project. We looked at infant mortality, looking at Michigan's rate compared to the national, and Michigan's rate continued to be a little bit above the national. Again, unacceptable. The red line is Michigan. Moving a little too fast. We also began to look at the differences between races, infant mortality and races here in the state. And the purple line reflects infant mortality of Asian Pacific Islanders here in Michigan. This line is our white rate, both lower than the state rate, which is that line in between the green line, this yellow line. This blue line is our Native American infant mortality, and again, the African American rate well above both the state as well as the lowest rates. That led us to begin to look at what was going on with our African American populations as well as our Native American populations. What else do we need to do as public health practitioners to improve birth outcomes for these particular populations? Were we doing some things that needed to change within public health? We also took a look at infant mortality rates by communities, really to get a hone into the picture and see what was going on. And this slide reflects the 11 counties with the highest infant mortality rates. And you'll notice this line is the African American, the black rate, where the dark purple is the white rate. And even in Wayne County, we had double digit for both black and white infant mortality. So we took, I guess you'd call, a deeper dive into this subject. The California newsreel published Undoing Racism that we took a look at, and one of the segments of that film asked the researchers asked the questions, why do African American women have babies that are too small at twice the rate of white Americans? And they posed two specific questions. Was it income? Did it have to do with SES? Or was there something about the DNA that made this happen? And what they found was that economic conditions did influence health, but they weren't limited to just that. You heard Dr. Kennedy talk about the social determinants and how they impact birth outcomes. They found that even though, let me go back to the questions. even though true low-income women did seem to have poor birth outcomes, but in African American population, even women that were college graduates with higher income levels, higher education levels, tended to have poorer birth outcomes than white women that had not graduated from high school. So that wasn't explaining the difference. They also looked at whether there was something in the DNA. Was this genetics? And took a look at women who were coming into the U.S. from African countries, and those women tended to have the same birth outcomes as white women, at least for that first generation. But after they'd been here for a number of years, their birth outcomes tended to model those of African Americans that had been here for years. Same was true for Mexican Americans that were new to our country. So again, genetics was not explaining this difference. I'm not going to go into social determinants. We've had a good lesson in math. What we did learn from working with Dr. Kennedy as well as Dr. Liu and others that have been studying this subject is that we needed to understand the life course perspective theory and what that means for the work that goes on in public health. This slide depicts the protective factors and risk factors that exist by race. And you notice for the white race, there tend to be a lot of protective factors as compared to African Americans that have few protective factors and many risk factors. So we wanted to better understand what it is that affects those, how we can change that phenomenon. And we also realized we needed to look at this over time. It's important to recognize those key points in time that are primed to help affect the health of women that we're working with. The reproductive years, early childhood, pregnancy, pre-puberty as well as puberty. We've talked about health equity. One thing I do want to point out, if we achieved health equity here in Michigan, we could have saved over 200 babies' lives in 2009. The numbers we're talking about are real people. So you have to think about it in that context. And as it says, enough to fill a jet. One of the documents that we looked at was published by Institute of Medicine called Unequal Treatment, that looked at differences in health practices by practitioners and found that there were specific differences in health care delivery as well as health testing that went on by race. And it was a surprise because we're talking practitioners that use standard of practice to deliver services, and yet they actually found that across every intervention, you can read it for yourself, that people of color received a different treatment modality than the white population, reflecting poor quality medical care. We also found that differences existed in, even after you held control for insurance, economics, and severity of disease. So that wasn't the answer. It really did have to do with race. And that the differences were seen in both Medicare and the VA system. This report was published in 2003, and it was an eye-opener for all of us, I think. And really led us to look at what was going on with that. We realized practitioners weren't intentionally doing it, but something was happening. Other reports that we used included the ones that are listed here that help to examine this issue a little closer, to give us more information of what we could really look at in our public health practice that we may want to change. The Joint Center published a report that looked at the cost of inequities. $1.24 trillion could really address many of the holes that we have within our nation right now. And approximately 54,000 days of productivity were lost, estimated to be lost as a result of health inequities. Again, issues that really impact the well-being of our country. So we wrote to the Kellogg Foundation, got a grant for about 3.5 years that allowed us to do mainly these three things. Create a, first of all, learn what it was we needed to do differently in the way we provide our public health work, and create a model for doing this. And you know, the interesting fact about the PRIME project is this was unique for Michigan. No other state had really embarked on anything like this, so we didn't really have experience of others to pull from. So we were learning as we developed this model. As I said, we targeted African Americans and Native Americans. We also were looking to work with our local partners, because many communities in Michigan had already been examining the issue of racial inequities and involved in activities and providing some services and some answers to this issue. And so as a state health department, we wanted to learn what they were doing and see how we could adapt that to our work. And then also establish a quality improvement process so that once we put the model in place, we could maintain it and adjust it over time. Talked about, let me go back to this. I talked about the grant. We had a steering team that you can see listed here. But one of the things that came out of our work was the need to establish a Native American ad hoc work group. One of the things we examined was how we can better understand the health issues of Native Americans when we weren't collecting the data. We weren't reporting the data, I'll say it that way. Native American traditionally had small numbers, and so it was often reflected as that asterisk on the table, you know, and so if you don't have the data, you don't really look at what it means or what the difference is. And we really examined what was needed in order to be able to collect that data. And so we took this ad hoc work group, helped us to look at where we needed to go, and I'll talk about that in a minute or two. Our steering team included the list of folks you see here. We had a nice diverse group from the health department. We also had U of M School of Public Health involved with the work. We had a subject matter expert from Vanderbilt University, and Dr. Kennedy and her staff and Ingham County were very involved, as well as Wayne County and Intertribal Council and the Corner Health Center. I mentioned the involvement with local communities. That's what we called our local learning collaborative. You can see all of the agencies listed here. As I said, many of these agencies have been involved in this health equity work over the past 10 years in some cases. And so there was quite a bit that we could learn from them and begin to incorporate in our work. So what we did, We expose staff to, and we use my bureau, the Bureau of Family, Maternal, Child Health, really as the pilot for all of this work. We expose staff to the trainings you see listed here. First of all, the Undoing Racism training that has been around for close to 25 years. When Brenda talked about it yesterday, she said people were just anxious to attend. Not. Our white staff were hesitant because they didn't really want to be put in a position to be blamed for the situation that existed. The black staff were resistant because they didn't really want to have to continue to tell the story of their experiences over and over and be questioned about the validity of it. And so we had to do some encouragement. We actually had to make the training mandatory. But afterwards, we did surveys that helped to evaluate the knowledge gained during the sessions, and everyone gained knowledge. Our white staff really experienced a larger learning curve than many of our African American employees, but everyone learned something from the trainings and would recommend it to others. The Health Equity and Social Justice training is offered by Ingham County, and Dr. Kennedy and her staff made that available to us. And yet, after staff went through those two trainings, people still said they don't know what this means for the work that we have to do. And so we began to develop these health equity learning labs, using our WIC division to actually focus in on their specific duties and begin to develop health equity plans for certain parts of their work. We also, I do have to mention, I know my time is running out, but with the Native American CRAMS work, CRAMS is a survey that's done in Michigan routinely to get better information about pregnancy outcomes of women. And we have traditionally taken a small sample of Native Americans, and yet it's too small to really gain, to use for making decisions. So we decided, through the direction of that ad hoc work group, to do a PRAMS of all the Native American births in the state for a full year, to have a large enough sample size so that we could make some good decisions. As we got into that work, we also realized that there was another way.
Just explain what PRAMS is real quick.
Sure. Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring Survey, I'm sorry. It's a survey that's done on pregnant women. Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring Survey. We also looked at other ways of identifying Native American infants, and traditionally we just look at the mother's birth, the mother's race, when we identify race of an infant. But it was suggested that we may also want to look at the father's race. And in doing that, we actually doubled the sample size of the Native American infants that we included in the survey. Very significant. We worked along with CDC that was interested in doing this work too, and they're actually looking at our approach and modeling some of their work after that. We also worked with the tribes here in the state, because we knew they needed to understand the purpose of the survey, why we were doing it, and needed to help us in order to get the responses that we needed to have the data. One of the requests that the tribes made to us for working with us is that we share the data with them, because they didn't have access to it. It sounds simple, but we hadn't done this before. I mean, we've been doing this CRAMS work for a couple of decades. So we really were looking at changing the way that we do our work in order to be more responsive to the populations that we're working with. The other major outcome of our work was this health equity, was this health equity status report. Yeah, go back to it. And hopefully, if you're not aware of it, you'll take some time to go to our website and take a look at it. It was our way of identifying metrics that we could use to help to see if we're making a difference. And it includes social determinant metrics that, though the health department isn't responsible for, we are looking to collaborate with others that are involved in those kinds of efforts to better address them for our population. We created a website, and at the end of the presentation I have it. It's a michigan.gov website, and I really encourage you to take a look at it. These are the social determinants that are part of the health equity status report. And I just encourage you to make sure that we report on this data on an annual basis. Hold our feet to the fire on this. Past that. Talked about what we're learning. One of the, I guess, I'll mention the recommendations that I have for the use of the information you're hearing today. As I said, use the health equity status report, use our infant mortality report. I know Milani's going to talk about that a bit. Go to our website. We have excellent resources that are specific to Michigan that should be used. They're being used nationally because we are really setting the model, if you will. As recommendations for funding are made, please excuse me, remember that infrastructure needs resources. To be able to work across departments, we need to have the support to make that happen, the money to make that happen. I also encourage the use of market research technology, things that businesses use to help give them information about their communities along with that public health data, so that you learn about your own constituency. And then include flexibility in the funding and encourage joint grant making, as well as understanding that equity is not equality. With that, I'll close with this last slide, which I think tells the story very well. Here you've got kids that want to look at the ball game. The slide on the left is equality. Everybody has the same size crate, right? And yet, everybody can't see the game. So unless you adjust for the needs of the individual, everyone won't be able to play or enjoy it. So with that, I'll close. These are the websites I mentioned. Dr. Anaga mentioned that she'll make the slides available, so you'll have them. And Brenda Jagaday is our Prime Project Coordinator. So please use her as a resource.